Congratulations on making your decision to become a school leader. Stepping out of the classroom and into school leadership is a process. And one of the first things that I always recommend for people to do is to do an audit of the experiences that you've had so far in your teaching career so that you're tidying off what's been and starting to plan what's going to happen moving forward. Hi, my name's Michelle Davis and I'm a teacher career coach. I help teachers who are aspiring leaders transition out of the classroom and into school leadership. Okay, so today is all about doing an audit of your teaching experiences because everything you've done up to date can count and can be added in some way into a selection criteria response if it's the first time you're really looking at doing this process. And so you could be halfway through a project, perhaps you're running a committee, perhaps you've just put your hand up to take on a particular program, or it could just be, you know what, I've made the decision and I need to decide what I need to do next. Getting an idea of what you've done already can actually be really, really empowering. And so by doing this process, you're going to be able to find that you'll be able to talk about where you've been in a much more firm and empowered state rather than going, oh, I've just been a teacher for X number of years and now I really want to start going into leadership. All of the stuff before still counts. And so I need you to remember it and use it. All right. So this audit that I've put together for you is a process that you can update very frequently, but it's going to take some time to do it the first time. And so here's how I would start off. First of all, what I would recommend is you getting a copy of each of the selection criteria responses you could possibly have to give. So in Queensland, we have 5, but we only have a right to 4 of them. And more often than not, we actually only have a right to 3. And so for different states, you'll have a different amount of criteria you need to respond to. Go and find them. You might need to Google them. You might need to have a conversation with somebody, but they are very readily available. Another great place to find what is likely to be asked of you is to go on to wherever leadership roles are advertised in your state. And so Queensland is Smart Jobs, and you would go on, you would look up head of department because that's what we call a role that is in charge of a group of teachers, and you would find a role description. In that role description, it will tell you which of the selection criteria are needed to be responded to for a particular role. Not all of them are asked for all the time. If you're going for permanency of anything though, you're probably looking at responding to all of them eventually. But by then, you'll have a stack of experience. We're looking at what you're going to start with what you've got. Okay, so now that you've gathered together what the criteria are, I actually have a little bit of an audit sheet for you to fill in. It's a PDF that I created. You can sign up to my resource library, which has any time that I make a resource that goes with a blog post or a video that's a freebie, I'm going to put it up into the resource library that I have. And so there'll be a link in the description below for you to be able to sign up for it too. Okay, you've got all those experiences gathered together. The next step is to go for a trip down memory lane. Start with what you're doing right now, any roles that you have, and then go backwards through time. And what I want you to do is to write down maybe a heading or a short description or a summary of what the role was, and then all the tasks and actions that you took whilst in that role. And so when I say role, it doesn't need to be a formalized role where you get time off to do this thing. It could just be you were Year 7 maths coordinator, and that's something you did for 12 months or even 6 months. Write it down. And as that maths coordinator, what did you do in that role? And so all of those little steps and all those responsibilities and those actions you took all can count towards a selection criteria response. I'm not saying they all are definitely going to count right now, but that's not the point. The point is to audit everything that you've got so that you can see it in front of you rather than it swimming around in your head. All right, so is there a unit that you've written from scratch? Maybe you redid a piece of assessment and it needed a big rejig, and perhaps you've been on committees, perhaps you've done extracurricular, maybe you are doing something in the student welfare space that's really unique. How else have you how else have you participated in a school community, and maybe even what networks that you're part of? And capture what you've done this year, maybe last year, and then go back another year and write them all down. because even if you can't use them for a response for a leadership role, they are wonderful fodder for your resume. So it's still going to have a purpose. When you're doing this, if you get stuck for inspiration, I would strongly recommend a couple of things other than after you've used up your brilliant brain and you've gone through all the memories you can possibly bring up. Sit down and have a chat with any boss you've got now or bosses you've had in the past. So a head of department, head of curriculum, head teacher, somebody that you were working with, and see if they can remember things that you've done. Ask your friends, your colleagues around you, what have I done? Ask your beloved significant other in your life. I would also have a suggest of any past colleagues. If you worked in a different school, reach out to them. And then my other favorite one is to go for a walk through your digital files and open up things from previous years, looking at the date, sorting by date and going through, oh, that's a thing that I did. That's right. I led a group of teachers to learn how to write an assessment piece. Here we go. And you can add that in because I sometimes forget what I've done. And it's not till you go back and look at the paper trail that's been created. And that's another one. Emails would work really well. Go back through if you've still got them and have a look for everything that you've done. There is a general rule when you're writing selection criteria that it shouldn't be too old. And by old, it can be like 5-ish years. But for this purpose, let's just gather everything up all together. I went back to my 5th year of teaching when I was doing this exercise and even wrote down back then I was already doing year 10 coordinator role and what was responsible in those roles, just so that I had a really good grasp of everything that I've done. All right, so you've done those first 2 steps, got your criteria together and done your walkthrough. As you're going through, on the PDF I've provided for you, I've got space for you to, it's only got 3 spaces, but you can create this and make it into a table or put it into a Google Sheet or make a spreadsheet from it, whatever you want. But write down what the role is, all the parts underneath it, and we're going to next go on to looking at each of those things. So in the third part, you're really looking at them through a leadership lens. And now that you've written them all down, what I want you to do is you wrote down the selection criteria that you need to respond to up the top. And I suggest you put a code beside it. So like the first criteria is lovingly called SC1, selection criteria 1. Not that crazy. 2, 3, 4, and as you go down, however many that you've got, or it might be KC, key capability number 1. Whatever the language is, just come up with a little code and then go, right, so number 1 talks about this thing. In this job, is there any evidence that I did that thing? So if it's looking for quality teaching and learning and leading teachers around curriculum, then every time you've done one of those things, tick that little column beside it to be able to then see, yes, I've done that thing in that role. Yes, I've done this thing in this role. And then move along to the second criteria and read it. And then go, right, in this story, in this role that you took or whatever it is, does this link up? And you're basically auditing now each of those roles that you've had through your career. And is there any evidence that you were working towards any of those key capabilities? And so once you've done that, the last layer of auditing it is to make a note, but either you can highlight or you could tick, I don't mind what you do, but I want you to highlight the ones that you did with other people. So it's basically putting a note next to any of the ones that you did by yourself. So perhaps you implemented a new way of teaching maths, but only you did it in your classroom. That particular story is not going to have any legs for leadership because you didn't work with anybody else. If that story is just you in your classroom doing something for yourself, then it's got limited ability to be able to be used in a big picture. However, if you're doing something by yourself and it's part of a bigger school system, so for example, I was an intervention teacher, and so I would work with small groups of students and working on their deficit areas, and I would do that in a particular time of day. And although I was technically doing it by myself with a group of students, it was actually responding to the school AIP, so whatever our annual improvement plan was, around moving students forward or being able to provide greater differentiation. And so I was still able to use that story because it applied to something bigger. And so use this lens of, if I just benefited and I didn't work with any other teachers on this, and it wasn't a priority for anyone else but for me, then I need you to put a mark next to it and to say this is unlikely to be able to be used at the next stage when you're looking at your taking these and moving them into stories. All right, so now that you've got all of these here sitting in front of you, just let's have a practice. And so what I want you to do now is I just want you to have a go. So many times with our students, we just say, have a go. You don't know until you give it a go. And so I want you to use that lens when you're doing this now. I want you to think, right, I'm going to have a go at writing a selection criteria story. Off I go. And choose one of them and then look at the key capabilities that it talks to and have a go at writing out the story. Now, if this is your first time and you have no model to use, I would recommend just write it out like a narrative. Because even when you're writing it out like a narrative, you're going to have a story and maybe there's going to be some dot points. The point of this exercise is just to look for which of these stories that you've got, looking at the key capabilities, your selection criteria you're trying to respond to, which one actually has a beginning, middle, and end, and a narrative that flows through it. It's not just a job that was done. It held a bigger purpose. And so I'm going to write more on that. I'm going to do another video about how to take that to the next step. But right now, all you need to be able to do is grab that audit, look at everything you've done. Now look at it through the lens of the selection criteria and tick off which ones actually align. And then now have a crack at writing one of them. I call it a draft. I do it with my clients all the time. Now there's a last note on this process about doing a stock take of everything you've done so far. It's that when you're doing this, don't downplay what you've done. It is so easy to do, and it is so easy to look at it and go, you know what? Oh, I just wrote a unit of work. Oh, I just wrote a piece of assessment. Oh, I just, sat with somebody at lunchtime and taught them how to do blah, blah. I just is the phrase you need to listen for so that you know that you are not seeing the impact that you've had. Look, you've had a beautiful, rich teaching experience and a beautiful, rich teaching career, and you have taught hundreds, if not thousands of students over your time. That's a massive achievement, and you've had massive influence. And leadership is about influence, okay? So you're now going to look at what you did as a teacher and working with your peers about what you have done together, and you are then going to own your influence that you had. And it's a very powerful place and a different mindset for an aspiring leader to start moving into. But this activity can really highlight whether or not you're good at claiming your influence or if you are going to downplay it. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I hope these tips helped you. Remember that you can sign up for the resource library link, which will then allow you to grab any freebies that I make in the future. And don't forget to follow along on Facebook and Instagram so you know when the next video comes out. Have an awesome journey, aspiring leaders. Bye.